Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Good on Paper. Good on Paper is an American romantic comedy that tells the story of a girl named Andrea, a stand-up comedian who has spent years putting her career ahead of her love life when she accidentally stumbles upon the perfect guy at an airport. The perfect guy, whose name is Dennis, seems impressive to Andrea at first glance. He works as a hedge fund manager and seems to have enough success with the ladies himself that it piques Andrea's curiosity. And as is typical with these sorts of movies, one event happens after another and the two end up becoming romantically involved with each other. The two are really happy together at first, but Andrea's best friend Margot senses something off with him and isn't convinced at all that he is who he says he is. And after a while, Andrea slowly but surely realizes the same thing, and she tries to figure out just what kind of guy Dennis really is. I will admit that this is an interesting idea that does sound good on paper, if you'll pardon the pun in connection to this movie's title, but unfortunately the movie's characters just totally ruin it. Iliza Schlesinger plays the lead role of Andrea in this movie, and you can just tell that she had a big hand in the way this movie turned out right from the outset. She's not the director or the producer, but she is the screenwriter, and as a result, you can see her stamp plastered all over this movie. That's not necessarily to say that that's a bad thing, though. Personal projects aren't outside of the norm in Hollywood, and for what it's worth, I thought that out of all the characters that were featured in this movie, Andrea was definitely the best, or at least worst, depending on how you interpret it. Honestly though, there's not a whole lot to write home about as far as her performance is concerned. She just doesn't have much in the way of personality other than a constant sarcasm that is present in every scene that she is in and slowly but surely starts to grate on your mind. There are a few scenes that attempt to make Andrea more interesting as a character, and they do have some funny scenarios behind them, in that Andrea is an aspiring actress who's trying to get the lead part of a TV show, and we see her going through the whole audition process, and it is interesting to see, but the movie just doesn't focus on that aspect of her character enough as I would have liked to see. Ryan Hansen plays the other lead role of Dennis, Andrea's lover in the movie, and oh my god, his character was terrible. I'm sure Ryan Hansen is a fine actor in other movies, and he did okay in this movie as best as he could given the material that he was given anyway, but I'm sorry, as a character, Dennis was freaking terrible. Right from the very moment when I first laid eyes on him, when he first meets Andrea at the airport, I hated him. I hated his teeth, I hated his glasses, I hated his sweater, I hated his attitude in general. He just comes across as a really stereotypical nerdy beta. I couldn't believe that this is who Andrea was destined to fall in love with in this movie. On top of all this, it is so obvious that he's the main antagonist of the story right from the get-go. He's a terrible liar, always saying that he does this and he does that. Oh yeah, and I also do that as well. And he gives a lot of social cues that would be really obvious or at least questionable in real life, yet for whatever reason, Andrea just turns a blind eye to it all until about 3/5 of the way into the movie. He is literally the perfect example of r/nice guys material, which if you've ever browsed that subreddit, you'll know exactly what kind of guy I'm talking about. And considering the fact that Reddit is mentioned once or twice in this movie throughout, I wouldn't be surprised if Iliza took some inspiration from reading that sub when she was writing the script for this movie. Margaret Cho as Andrea's best friend Margot was just awful. I'm sorry for anyone who's a fan of Margaret Cho, but her performance just didn't do it for me in this movie. Her humor mostly consisted of having yelling and screaming matches with Andrea whenever she could, and for some reason the movie really wants to drive the point home that her character is a lesbian. And I don't mean in a subtle way, I mean in a really, really obvious kind of way. Like she's practically foaming at the mouth when she's in the presence of other women. That's how awful it is. So the movie is advertised as being a romantic comedy, but as you can probably tell from what I've said about the movie at this point, this movie doesn't particularly excel at being romantic or comedic. The romance between Andrea and Dennis in this movie just isn't believable. Dennis claims to be in love with Andrea pretty much at first sight, but everything he does and says in this movie, other than when he literally says "I love you," points to the complete opposite. Meanwhile, Andrea remains oblivious throughout much of the movie toward all of the really obvious social cues that point to Dennis being a total psychopath and gives him way too many chances to take him back whenever he does screw up and begs forgiveness. And there's this really weird friend zone angle going on between them in the sense that they're both pretending to not be attracted to each other. Like one of them will say, "Oh yeah, I'm going on a date after I finish hanging out with you." "Oh, you're going on a date? So am I." It is so obvious that they are attracted to each other, especially when Dennis confesses to Andrea that he literally wants her to be his girlfriend, and just how creepy that came across. Like, Girl, how are you seriously not bothered by how he came across in that scene? As far as the comedy is concerned, it is a little better than the romance, but not by a whole lot. There's just too many silly scenes present in this movie's story that bog down the whole thing, that all come across more as desperate than actually being genuinely funny. One thing I noticed in this regard is when Iliza Schlesinger is performing stand-up comedy routine as Andrea in the movie. There's like 6 or 7 of these stand-up bits spread out throughout the story, and they really distract from the overall narrative. I understand that Andrea is a comedian and we're supposed to be seeing her perform and express her thoughts now and then, but the bits just aren't that funny. They came across as rip-offs of Seinfeld if you've ever seen the show, and the audiences didn't even laugh all that much in those segments. They more or less just sat in the background lightly clapping and chuckling the whole time, like ah ha ha. One exception to the comedy in this movie, however, is Serena, who's performed by Rebecca Rittenhouse. She's basically Andrea's rival who seems to get every movie part offered to her anytime she goes to an audition, and I loved her. She was fantastic in every scene in this movie. She always leaves Andrea eating her dust wherever she goes, and she does it all with this innocent smile on her face, and the way that she leaves Andrea just increasingly furious as the movie progresses in its story is just pure gold. In spite of the few golden nuggets of comedy that are present in this movie, though, it gets lost in the same habit that many other modern comedies do these days, which is trying to preach some sort of half-hearted social message. The classic feminism angle is lazily implemented in the background in the movie, and it only really becomes prevalent in one scene between Margot and Andrea whenever they're having an argument in an apartment. Margot says something really stupid in that scene. I don't remember exactly everything that she said to Andrea, but she said something to the effect of, just because you do something that I disagree with and you agree with doesn't make it feminist. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's a free woman in a free country. She can do whatever she wants. That's the whole point of equality. It seems that the movie is going out of its way to demonize its male characters as much as possible, as well as men in general. There's a scene where a drunk fan accosts Andrea on the street at the end of one of her shows, and he insults her in the most cliche, juvenile way possible. This is what he says: "You perform pretty well. For a girl." Ah, oh, dear God, I can't believe that was an actual line in this movie. Based on what I've read about this movie, it seems that it's based on a true story, or at least mostly based on a true story according to how this movie is marketed. I'm guessing that since Iliza wrote the script herself, that a lot of the events that occur in this movie story are based on events that she experienced firsthand during her stand-up comedy career. While I like the realistic approach to the story in this respect, it's hard to tell where the line is met between reality and fiction. And when the movie starts to make sense and it actually veers toward the direction of being funny, Iliza's character will get into a bitter rant about some random social value that the audience does not care about in that particular moment, and the whole movie as a result just has an air of mean-spiritedness about it. Overall, Good on Paper is an appropriate title to represent the overall quality of this movie. It's not the worst rom-com by any means, but it's still a stinker. I've never seen Iliza Schlesinger perform stand-up comedy before until I saw this movie, so I can't speak for the quality of her work on that front, but I'm pretty sure the only people who would enjoy this movie are those who consider themselves fans of Iliza's stand-up comedy work, and even then, I still think that's a bit of a stretch. Schlesinger clearly had an axe to grind against somebody when she wrote the script to this movie. There are some funny and charming moments present in its story, but the overall presentation of it all, as well as the overt preachiness of its social values, just comes off as angry, sour, and unappealing overall. Anyways, guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Good on Paper. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the American action thriller, The Ice Road. Bye-bye!